She heard his voice before she understood what was happening. It was deep, rough, and close enough to turn the room cold. In the townhouse at 2319 East 100th Street on Chicago's South Side, the student nurses had gone to bed expecting an ordinary summer night. They were young women from South Chicago Community Hospital, sharing rooms, studying, working long shifts, and trying to build careers in a city that still felt new to some of them. Then, late on July 13, 1966, an armed stranger forced his way inside. By morning, 8 of those women would be dead, and Corazon Amurao, a 23-year-old exchange nurse from the Philippines, would be the only one left alive to tell police what had happened in that house. Amurao lived in the townhouse with other student nurses, women who shared meals, hospital shifts, and cramped rooms while they trained. There were 9 women in the house that night. Richard Speck entered at about 11 p.m., carrying a knife and also using a gun to control them. He told them he wanted money. He took watches, cash, and other belongings, then gathered the women and forced them to obey him while he moved through the house. The promise of robbery did not last long. One by one, he began leading the nurses away. The women left behind could not see everything, but they understood enough. Each time he came back, one more friend was gone. Speck had come into that house already carrying a record of violence and instability, but the women inside could only deal with the man in front of them. He had a knife, a gun, and the loose, unpredictable manner of someone who might turn in any direction without warning. That made the house feel even smaller. These were not women with room to run down a hallway and out a back door. They were being controlled inside a confined place by a man who kept returning from the rooms where he took their friends. As the night wore on, the danger became unmistakable. The pattern was too clear. This was not a burglary spinning out of control. It was a slaughter moving room by room. That was when the night changed inside Amurao's mind. Until then, fear still left room for hope that the intruder would take what he wanted and leave. But as the pattern repeated, she understood that staying visible could get her killed. At some point, while Speck was out of the room, she slipped from sight and hid beneath a bed. It was a desperate decision made without any guarantee it would work. She did not know whether he had seen her move, whether he would search again, or whether she would be found seconds later. What she knew was that the women taken away were not coming back. For hours, she stayed under that bed, listening to footsteps, doors, voices, and the movement of a killer inside the same house. She could not run. She could not call out. She could only stay silent and try to judge from sound alone whether he was still near her room. The victims were killed by stabbing, strangling, slashing, or a combination of those methods, and one was sexually assaulted before being murdered. By the time dawn approached, Amurao was still alive only because Speck either lost count or did not realize a 9th nurse was spending the night in the townhouse. Survival came down to silence, nerve, and the narrow accident that he failed to see what was inches away from him. She remained hidden until nearly 6 in the morning. Only when she believed he was gone did she crawl out. The scene inside confirmed what she had feared through the night. Patricia Matusek, Nina Jo Schmale, Pamela Wilkening, Suzanne Ferris, Marianne Jordan, Merlita Gargulo, Valentina Passion, and Gloria Davy were dead. Amurao got out and screamed for help from a second-story ledge. Police responded to a crime scene that stunned even seasoned investigators. Several of the victims, like Amurao herself, had come from overseas to work and train as nurses in Chicago. From that moment on, Amurao became central to the case. She was not only the lone survivor, she was the one person who had heard the killer, seen him closely, and could describe the hours inside the house. Her account helped police produce the sketch that spread across Chicago newspapers. Detectives also found fingerprints at the townhouse, but in the first hours after the murders, the city needed a face, a voice, and a name to hunt, and much of that began with what Amurao could remember after enduring the worst night of her life. Speck was caught quickly, but not because he had been careful. 2 days later, after a man recognized the sketch, police were pointed toward him. He ended up at Cook County Hospital after an apparent self-inflicted injury, and a surgical resident recognized the "Born to Raise Hell" tattoo newspapers had described. Police were called, Speck was arrested on July 17th, and the case against him hardened fast. Investigators matched his fingerprints to prints recovered from the townhouse, and Amurao was able to identify him as the man who had controlled the house that night. The survival itself was only the first part of what Amurao had to endure. She then had to repeat the story for detectives, prosecutors, and finally a jury. Because of the enormous publicity around the case, Speck's trial was moved from Cook County to Peoria. There, in the courtroom, Amurao became something more than a survivor. She became the witness who broke any illusion that the killer might fade into legal ambiguity. According to multiple accounts, she stood, walked toward Speck, pointed at him, and said, "This is the man." The words were simple. The act was not. A young nurse who had hidden under a bed while her friends were murdered stood face to face with the man who had done it. That testimony mattered because the evidence was already strong and her certainty made it stronger. Amurao placed Speck inside the house. His fingerprints tied him to the scene. On April 15, 1967, the jury found him guilty of all 8 murders after less than an hour of deliberation. He was sentenced to death, though the sentence was later reduced after legal changes. He died in prison in 1991. None of that changed the central fact of the case. The woman he failed to find in the dark was the woman who helped make sure he never walked free again. What made Corazon Amurao's story so unsettling was not just that she survived. It was how she survived. No one burst into the house in time to save her. She stayed alive by making herself disappear and by holding her nerve while the sounds of murder moved around her in the dark. Then, after living through that, she carried the memory into court and used it. The women killed that night were often remembered together because the crime was so infamous. But Amurao had known them in ordinary life before they became a case file and a headline. Her survival preserved one witness. Her testimony preserved the truth of what happened in that townhouse. In the years after the trial, the case remained notorious, but notoriety did nothing to soften what Amurao had actually endured. She had not survived a quick attack or a random near miss. She had spent an entire night trapped inside a house with a man systematically killing the women around her. That was the reality behind the headlines, and it was the reality she carried out of that room when dawn finally came. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.